Okay, I think we are live. So welcome everyone to our March Public Philosophy Talk. These talks are hosted by Loyola University Chicago's MAP chapter. MAP stands for Minorities in Philosophy and is an international organization that aims to address structural injustices in academic philosophy and remove barriers that impede participation for members of traditionally marginalized groups. In this talk series, MAP members from Loyola University Chicago interview philosophers in various stages of our career. My name is Gina Lebkuecher. I am an LUC MAP graduate organizer. We're being supported behind the scenes by MAP undergraduate organizer, Matthew Kumar-Monte. And today I'll be interviewing Schola Iradukunda. Schola, would you please introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm happy to. Hello, my name is Schola. I am a first-year PhD student at Emory University. I actually did my undergrad at Loyola. Graduated in December 2020 with a double major in finance and philosophy. And I was actually also like a member of the Loyola MAP chapter. So I am excited to be here today to catch up and just hang out.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to be catching up with you too. So to get started, you just said that you graduated from Loyola and are now at Emory. So I was wondering if you would start off by just telling us a little bit about that experience of applying to grad school and transitioning to grad school in philosophy, and maybe why you decided to pursue a philosophy PhD.
Okay. I guess so. I started my undergrad as a finance major. I was actually in a community college before I transferred to Loyola. And so I transferred to Loyola as a finance major. But then I started taking philosophy classes, and I was like, okay, maybe I should minor. And then 2 years later, I actually did a full major. And so at that point, it was just interest. The more I learned, the more I wanted to know. So I guess I just found like I'm so glad because I was never exposed to philosophy before until Loyola. So I'm grateful and glad that I was able to find something that I like, that's something that I'm interested in, something I'm passionate about. But also like in that process, like as I took classes and talked to professors and students, people were like, do you want to go to grad school? That I had always had it in the back of my mind, but it had never been concrete. I don't think it was concrete until maybe I signed my offer, because you make the decision and I really wanted it so bad, but even up to the last moment, the decision was still like taking form. And I forget the last part of your question, but that's just remind me if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I think you covered most of it, right? The question was why you decided to go to grad school, which you covered. But I was wondering if you could also tell us a little bit about the process, both of applying and of transitioning to grad school. And in particular, if you have any advice for other philosophy students who might be considering grad school.
Yeah. So in terms of process, so just very quickly, you graduate and then you have to come up with a rating sample, pick a number of schools, get recommenders, apply and see what happens, right? That's the broad stroke. Those are the broad strokes. But I think for me, like in like the rating sample, coming up with that, like I think I did more philosophy than I had ever done in my application process, because you really have to reflect on why you're doing this and try to get as much of an idea, as much as possible, of an idea of what grad school will be like. And just to like digress, my last semester I did independent study, which was super helpful because it just started with like, I like reading this book and I like reading this person. So kind of like, I'm interested, like I want to know why they're saying this, why they're doing this, what do they mean by X, Y, and Z. And so then I would go into, like, my professor would recommend a few readings, and then we'll come back and discuss and like branch out into other things. And by the end of the semester, I was able to come up with a topic that I have like workshopped, because usually I would just pick a topic from the syllabus and write about that. And so I think like that process gave me a sense of what like combining passion and scholarship can look like. And I enjoyed doing it. Wasn't always fun. I think writing is always like painful, but I did enjoy it. So like that gave me like the confidence that like it's something I actually want to do, but B, it's actually something I can do. And so there's that. I think I was also a bit shocked and surprised by the fact that, because before I used to think, so for instance, when I was transferring, I just picked like the schools like randomly, it's a university, so I'm going, which is literally how I ended up at Loyola. But so in grad school, like I think I was surprised by the fact that the program has to be like a good fit, and that what you may want to do in the school you may want to go to may not be a good match. And so like trying to figure out where the people I want to work with, but also it was COVID, which was brutal because half the schools were not even recruiting. And so also like I remember one of my recommenders was like, let's do this. Like, I'm excited to recommend you, but keeping in mind that you may have to do this again. And I really appreciate that. Because again, going back to that resolve, but also to paint a picture of just how brutal it is. And so there was that. So talking to recommenders, trying to like tell them what I'm trying to do and where I'm applying. I have always found like people in the Loyola department that were like super helpful and invested in my success, and I really appreciate that. And so like the recommendation part wasn't, mind-wrecking in any sense. And then the rating, the statement of purpose. So that's about the process. And is this where I talk about adjusting? Did you ask about that too, or?
Sure, yeah, you can feel free to talk about that, or I also have questions based off of what you said.
Let's do that first.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So first of all, wow, yeah, I didn't even think about the fact that you went through the whole grad school application process during COVID. That must have been so stressful. So I'm really glad though to hear that you had professors that were supporting you and helped you throughout that process. And you also mentioned that the directed reading that you did as an undergrad helped you prepare for grad school, which totally makes sense, right? It helps you, like you said, unite your passion and also get some experience with research. So I just want to invite you to talk a little bit more about the directed reading. So what was kind of the general theme? Who was the professor, and how did that influence the direction that you decided to take your research now that you're in grad school?
Okay. I was reading Wayward Lives by Saidiya Hartman, which actually Professor Han Jacobs, she had recommended because she knew like what I was interested in. So she was like, I should read this book. So I read it during summer. But also, I don't know if you remember this, we were together in the phenomenology class, and we read Fanon, right? And my term paper was actually on Fanon, but I did feel like I did not do well because there was just so much to know about Fanon that I didn't know. And so what I wanted to say, or the ways in which I wanted to engage him, I just didn't feel like I could do it. And so the directed reading, I did it with Ayo Ewara, amazing experience. And so like I was like, I like reading Hartman. I feel like I have unfinished business with Fanon. So like, let's see where it goes. And so we just like explored a lot of questions from like Hartman's style. It was on like the question of imagination, right? Especially because like that had been the year where like everyone was like, let's imagine a better world, with everything that was going on. And so I was just like, what does that even mean? And so that's literally what we were doing. And so like from the questions that would arise out of the readings, we would read, like I remember reading Foucault for the first time, a bit of Hegel, and when I say a bit, I literally mean like 5 pages, but being able to like read it with him, like word for word, which I needed because again, I had no exposure to like these thinkers and ideas. And so like it was like a personalized way to like fill in the gaps and still like follow my research. And my writing sample ended up about being imagination in Fanon and Hartman. I mean, it could have been a few other things because by the end, like I had a few other ideas from people were reading and other topics, but like all papers, it was either like a thesis project or, you know, like, but that was the thing. So what I came in with is actually what I ended up doing, though like at the beginning, I never imagined that that's what the paper would look like. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that's really great. And I'm glad to hear that you had such a good experience with the directed reading. And yeah, it does sound like a really nice way to, I don't know, approach your research in a way that like you had, as you said it, you had unfinished business, and this way you were able to kind of work with that. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm wondering, so for readers who may not know, right, these thinkers are both broadly in the Black critical studies field, you would say, right? Or, okay, so I wonder if you want to talk a little bit more about that in connection with your other areas of interest, like deconstruction and poetics. So how do you see these related both to your life and to each other?
That's a big question, but I'll try. So far, my exposure to deconstruction has only been with Derrida, whom we read a lot in one class last semester, and I'm taking another class this semester. So, but even that, like, I wouldn't say like I've read that much Derrida. So that's just like in the brackets. Last semester, like the class was with Dr. Axel Carrera on hospitality, which is really like the question of difference. And so we read a lot of people, Kant, Heidegger, all the classics, all the thinkers of difference. But I did find that Derrida's approach or the way he thinks difference, especially like hospitality, the concept of the stranger, allowed me, just made it easier to think with him, especially like my paper ended up being about like the figure of the slave in Saidiya Hartman's Lose Your Mother as a stranger, like, so as like what kind of hospitality can be offered to the slave. And so like, for me, like Derrida came really close in his thinking about hospitality. I'm thinking of difference, but I also found that if you try to think the slave with him, like the coordinates change a bit and open up new questions in a way that's productive for my work. I need to push that paper a bit or go back to it. I'm actually like trying to present it for SPEP on a panel. I don't know if we got in, but so if I end up doing that, like I'll go back and try to refine it and figure out what exactly I am saying. But I also just really enjoy like reading Derrida. And just, I think like, I enjoy reading him as an experience, right? Like which is also like, I wish like all the philosophers I read, I actually enjoyed reading them because it just makes a difference to how I engage with the work. So like that's also coming from like my interest in literature as a side thing, but also like a thing I'm trying to bring to like my philosophical work. And so for now, what am I doing with him this semester? I am not yet sure, but I am still learning. And so like when you like, so broadly speaking, like about my interests, I am still like interested in Black critical thought. I would say like beyond Fanon and Hartman, like I've read other people that I want to actually like, spend time reading. So hopefully this summer I have a long list. and again, the question of like poetics in Black critical thought, especially the question of narrative, like for the slave, given like actually for the Black, given like the ontological incapacity. So that's something I want to explore over the next few semesters. So like in the Derrida class, we are doing a lot around language, and over the next few weeks, and again, on this long list of books I have to read, I'm hoping I can figure out a paper on this topic. So like my interests have remained pretty much the same, but they have broadened because I've been exposed to much more. Yeah.
That's great. And I hope that that's a good feeling and not too overwhelming, right? It's always like nice to have a long list of books to read. But as you've mentioned before in conversations we've had, it can also feel like the more you learn, the more you realize you have to learn.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but first of all, it's so exciting that you're preparing that paper for a conference. Good luck with that. And it sounds like you have other paper ideas in the works. I guess this brings us back around to my question from earlier about adjusting to grad school, because it sounds like you're doing a great job of trying to think through your own research, how to build on it. So this seems like, at least in my experience, something that is fairly new to graduate studies in philosophy compared to undergraduate. I don't know if you want to talk about that or other changes you see in how you relate to philosophy now that you're a grad student.
Okay. So being a late major, right? Like, especially like I remember at Loyola, there were students who had been reading philosophy like since high school. And I literally started when I was a junior. So I've always had that bit of insecurity about not knowing enough. It's just, like there is always that gap. And I don't know if you can even ever overcome that, because like whatever you specialize in, there is a lot of other things out there that you don't do. But for me, I think just like being a bit of a perfectionist, like I didn't feel prepared to even say something like, oh, this is what I'm working on, which is like the first day of grad school, everyone was asking like, so what do you work on? And I'm like, I just got here. What do you mean? What do I work on? Because in my mind, like coursework was supposed to be is the time to, again, fill in these gaps and try to figure out what I'm interested in. But I think it's also helpful, and this is what my professor says, like think about what you want to do, like think about what you're interested in right now, right? Whether it's a vague interest, something you've read 5 pages about or a book about, and where ideally you take it 5 years from now. And so talk from that point. When someone asks, what do you do? Speak from that point. Because just like, it doesn't matter whether you actually do it. It doesn't matter whether that's where you end up, that's what you end up thinking and writing, but you still have to be able to talk about your work. But I think for me, it's not even about talking about my work to other people in the sense of like networking or letting people know what I'm interested in, so that maybe we can, talk, or they can help me, or, it's because that's also important to do. But for me, like it works, like it forces me, or like retroactively makes me take ownership for my work, not even ownership, but like the confidence to actually be like, oh, I guess I have a project now that I have said I have a project. And so it's like, it makes me balance that sense of like, oh, I don't know enough, which I probably don't, but also like still like start something of my own, or try like engage with what I'm learning beyond this is nice, this is good to know, like try to actually work with it on this project. And so that's been the adjustment, especially because in grad school, like there are people who have different levels of exposure with philosophy. So it's very easy to underestimate yourself, which I did still do. There are classes where it takes me like 4 weeks to ever say anything, because I'm like, everyone here has a master's, everyone here has taken the class on this figure or this tradition before, like, what do I have to say, right? But when you think about whatever your project is, then you can actually formulate questions for this class that will allow you to participate and engage as much as the person you think knows too much, and actually that works. So yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, that is actually super helpful. It sounds like a good strategy, because part of what you're describing definitely sounds like imposter syndrome, right? Like a lot of grads that I talk to deal with imposter syndrome, and I really liked the way you explained that having a firm understanding of your own project, your own research, your own areas of interest and passion helps you to kind of approach these in a more confident way. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it sounds like another thing that you've been doing is thinking about networking or relating to different people in your program. I wonder if you've also tried to form community outside of your program, or because that's another thing. I don't know if you've felt this, but especially in the time of COVID, grads and undergrads I talk to feel a lot of isolation. And I think that philosophy can be kind of prone to this, in part because of what you're describing, how everyone has their own area that it seems like they're like so good at, but sometimes it's hard to get into. I know that's kind of a broad question, but if you just want to talk a little bit about how you've formed community for yourself in grad school.
Yeah. I will preface this by saying that I am lucky to be like in a metro area, because it's much easier to actually, and I'm starting with the question of like having community outside of grad school. So I think it's much easier to like meet people where there are many people, like in a city with things going on. And that's something that I have challenged myself to do. Sometimes I slack just because it's so comfortable to be with philosophers, but also sometimes it's like I need a life. So that's something I'm challenging myself to do, to actually like cultivate my social life outside of the department as much as I cultivate like my life in the department, right? And I think it's also I don't want to call it healthy, but it can like enrich your work in ways that you don't really imagine, just because like one way to do it would be like to talk with students who are not in philosophy, not in the human, not even like proximate to philosophy. I have a friend in like working on something in physics and geology or something like that. But every time we talk, like I learned something from him that I don't know, like I will think about when I'm doing my own work. And sometimes one time it took me to like a place that I didn't see coming, right? So I think it's also it's helpful in that way, because I think the pressure is like, oh, the more time I spend with people who know so much, the more I'll learn from them. But I don't think they have to be like doing what you do. Like you can learn from other people too, in ways that you can bring to bear on your work. And then in the department, I have been lucky to find community. And by that, I mean friends, colleagues, friends who are colleagues, colleagues who are not friends. So like different, so in that sense, and that's something that I find helpful to do. So like when I approach someone, or, like trying to figure out what this person can be and accepting what they cannot be, and giving room for the relationship to like grow into something else, as opposed to like imposing my own expectations or my own need on this person, especially because I feel like when we first came in, especially as a cohort, we didn't know anyone else in the city. We didn't, so it was just easy to like stick together and expect, in a sense, to just like let this be like the entire universe, right? And so with time, and this is also like things I have seen how, like I've learned from other people by watching how they navigate relationships. So this is like copy paste from what I've seen. And so it's like helpful to not assume that like we're going to be friends and colleagues for 5 years, forever and ever, but to actually like try to figure out what you need as a person, what you need as a scholar, and what you can have navigate or how you can bring those two to bear on each other. And then with professors, like mentors, not just colleagues, I think it's the same approach. Like, what do I expect from this person? How do I figure out if they are the right fit for me, right? And so that's helpful because it helps me like stay focused, right? So like we talked about the other day, like if a person is not like warm and welcoming, right? Maybe this is just how they work. And so the question is, what do I expect from them? And can I work with them given their temperament? Sometimes it's no, sometimes it's yes, because like they will give you all the mentorship just without that cozy feeling, right? And so, but also like being able to realize, like to notice when things are not working, and challenging myself to like find mentorship, find colleagues, not just even in the department, but like other professors. And currently, like I'm trying to like connect or find like students in other departments to like all over the country, so that, to learn from them, but also because you may actually find a better interlocutor somewhere else, as opposed to trying to find them by all means in your department, right? So that's what I'm trying to do, like socially, in the sense of community, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got some good strategies. I really like the way you explained trying to determine, what your expectations should be for a person, but at the same time having it open to growing, right? And your story that you just told about your friend, did you say in geology, who helped move your work in a different way? Or earlier you were mentioning that one of the things you love about Derrida is because of your interest in literature too. So it's really inspiring to hear, your take on how these things that you might not expect to contribute to your philosophy can contribute. And I know we've also talked about that in connection with your finance double major when you were in undergrad. So I guess I'll just invite you to speak more about how your finance double major or your other experiences in your life that don't on the surface look connected to philosophy, how they've improved your scholarship or changed the way you think about something.
Yeah. So with finance, like off the top of my head, last semester I took a class with Dr. Rocio Zambrana on debt, right? And so I had taken, the concept of debt had come up in finance, but it's always like treated within the confines of finance, right? So what are the numbers? What are the mechanics? What does it do in finance, right? But when I took the class, it was, I think, like mind-blowing for me, because you can literally take the concept of debt to like the very core of like subjectivity, all these concepts of like sovereignty, but even like the core of the social. And so like we looked at how like it goes from debt as a social, almost like a condition of possibility for the social in some thinkers, to debt in capital, like in financial capital. Like, how do we end up with the student debt crisis, and how is that related? Or how does debt as a social phenomena land us in debt as we like have it today, right? And so in that sense, I think it was very like I could then think about what I learned in finance class and try to think it together with what we're doing in the philosophy class. And my end of term paper ended up being about the concept of catastrophe in global finance, especially with like all these climate finance initiatives, which again, I had never thought together, or even like catastrophe itself. It's just a word, it's, you know, like a thing you say, even on a daily, because like I would be dramatic and just be like, this is catastrophic all the time. And so like trying to think about that as a philosophical concept, and see how that philosophical concept is interacting with like concrete everyday realities, be it social realities, but also like, excuse me, social realities, yeah, ontological realities, like just, so I think for me, it's like the greatest thing about doing philosophy, right? It's these moments when something I've always taken for granted, like something in my life, takes on a whole different shape. And how, given what I know about this concept in like everyday life, and then how can I talk about it philosophically, because it changes the picture, it changes how you see the world, but also it's just like very rewarding. We can talk about that more. But it's not just philosophy. So like I said, like literature, right? The things I'll read for fun, they somehow end up coming back to the work, be it like inspiring my style, how I write, be it helping me think of examples and counter examples when you're reading. And so I don't know, like it's difficult to trace the boundaries between like what is properly philosophy and what is properly mine or personal. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And it's so great to hear you describe it, because I think for a lot of people who are less familiar with philosophy, or maybe haven't had a chance to be exposed to it in the way that you have, they think of philosophy as this kind of like detached from the world, or like elitist or ivory tower, like head in the clouds stuff. So it's really great to hear you talk about how it seems like it seeps into every part of your life, and it has changed the way you interact with stuff. And of course, Black critical studies is one area of philosophy that is very interested in looking at what you talked about as these kinds of concrete realities, right? How to think about them, how to describe and hopefully change some of the structures of our world, right? But I also want to talk about, and you knew this was coming, the kind of popular culture understanding of critical race theory, and particularly the kind of scariness that it seems to have for some people. I can imagine that has affected your relationship with your work. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about your thoughts on this kind of current climate surrounding critical race theory as a kind of boogeyman in the media.
Yeah. So like you said, right, like a boogeyman, because now like things that even have nothing to do with critical race theory are, so it's now become a signifier. And so like when I talk about it, like I mean it like in this sense, right? I think nothing, I wouldn't say nothing surprised me about it, but nothing surprised me about it. And this is just me going on a limb, but I think it's just the paranoia around it, the force with which, you know, people are trying to suppress it. That's just anti-Blackness. And so I think it didn't surprise me. I mean, it's always surprising, right? Like every new instance is shocking in its own way, but it's also not shocking because this is just the world today, right? In that sense. But on the other hand, it's also scary because like what's going to happen in 5 years if no one is hiring Black people working Black thought and whatever is like associated with this CRT signifier. Who is going to read my work? How are they going to engage? These are all like questions that we should be concerned about as graduate students. That's on one hand, but I also think it motivates me to, before that, even like, I think it's just not a sign, not proof, not, it just shows that the work needs to keep being done, like the work needs to be done now more than ever, even though it will probably always be met by this kind of resistance. And I don't even know if, like, before this moment, I feel like there had just been, especially in the academy, suppression of work that would, again, be under that signifier before it became a signifier. And so in that sense, it's nothing new, but this work has been done for hundreds of years and we just have to keep doing it, right? And just on a small personal note, not that I think like the individual can change the system or anything like that, but it just motivates me to do the work, but also to do it well, like to be a really good philosopher, because most times, or where I am today, like sometimes I can't respond to, and sometimes you don't even have to respond, right? But I'm always curious, like also what's the philosophy behind this and how do I respond to the philosophy behind this? Because most people who will use the philosophy to defend their anti-CRT, they're probably wrong. And so like, I want to know what they're talking about so that if and when I do engage, like, I do know what I'm talking about. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear that despite, all of the hostility, all of the resistance, that you have been able to use it in some sense, to at least motivate you. And like you said, it is a good indication that the work needs to be done. So I know it's discouraging, but I'm glad that you're not letting it stop you.
Trying.
To change the subject, we actually have a question from the chat. So Warda asks, do you have a favorite class this semester?
Hi, Warda. Let's see. That's a hard question because I do feel like this semester I like, and I always, because we usually take 3 and I'm like auditing or sitting in one. And so usually 2 are just like hard to separate in terms of like, to rank in terms of like which one I like best. But let's see. So I'm taking that. It's always like I'm always trying to remember the classes I'm taking, even though I was in them this week. But let's see. I'll just say a bit about maybe all of them, right? And so I am taking, actually, there's a lot of Plato in my classes this semester, which is also like another thing, like unfinished business from undergrad. Like my last semester, I wanted to write about the Timaeus, and I did write about it, but at the end of the paper, it still felt like I want to engage with the scholarship on this. So I think it's actually a class on Plotinus, which is from Plato to like Neoplatonists. So I think maybe that's what I'll end up doing. Wow, I just came up with a paper topic, even though I failed to do it the whole week. Anyway, so I'm trying to think this, so especially like the concept of myth. Now, jumping ahead, I'm taking a class again on Derrida. And one of my favorite readings was Plato's Pharmacy, which is like the treatment of writing in Plato. And so, what am I trying to say about this? It was a really good read. So if you want to read something on a Friday night, just for fun, I would like recommend it. But I think it also, opened up questions that I do want to engage with, especially again, the whole treatment of writing as opposed to speech. And the way that, is it the reading where Plato just comes up with a myth? I'm hoping so. Like the way Plato like uses myth. So trying to like, again, go back to that paper from my last semester of undergrad. So I've said two things now. And then my other class is on like Black Hegel. What do I like about that one? I do want to like do something with, because this is my first time like reading Bataille and Membe. So I want to write something between the two, especially as it relates to like death as a sovereign expenditure. So death, speech, writing, and myth. That's what I'm doing this semester.
Cool, sounds really interesting. Yeah, and it sounds like you're kind of continuing the theme of drawing all these connections together. Yeah, so that's really cool. If anybody else has questions in the chat, I do encourage you to add them. We've only got about 15 minutes left. But for my next question, just to kind of pick up on this idea of drawing from your daily life to inform your philosophy, any thoughts on the opposite, how you kind of take a break from philosophy? So of course, all of us would love to read philosophy on a Friday night. So thanks for the recommendation. But I know also that a lot of grad students report getting kind of overwhelmed or burnt out. So do you have any hobbies or any things that you try to engage with to make sure that you do get a break when you need one?
Yeah, I think my favorite is, so just broadly on like burnout and rest and boundaries, right? Last semester I used to like study every day, even though like I would do, like I just needed study to validate how I spend the rest of the day. So even on Sunday, I'll be like, oh, I have all these things to do, but let me just read for 3 hours. But this semester I'm trying to like actually have one day of no study at all, just because I found that by Wednesday, Thursday, I was just really tired, like not physically, but I just don't want to hear about it anymore. And so the thing I really enjoyed just became like poison because I wasn't doing it right. But I think taking the day off, like not doing anything, even when I start itching, I'm like, oh, I remember this thing from this class, and I really actually want to see how so-and-so thought about it, or so-and-so said I should read this because it's interesting. So I'll just write it down and keep it moving, like I won't do it. But I found that when I actually do go back to the work the following day, like I'm more focused and I just have more energy than I used to have. Things I do for fun, I actually stumbled on this, like this book, I don't want to call them book trees, but like in neighborhoods, especially in Chicago, like they'll have this box where people put their books. So I found two books. One was like Song of Achilles, and then the other one was Arabian Nights, which I've never read. And so I like reading those like phantasmagorical kind of tales, like fairy tales, almost like things that make you think of things you just never think about on a daily basis. Just because like it helps me like relax. And sometimes I even like end up just like napping in the book, which I shouldn't say publicly because what kind of philosopher falls asleep when they're reading? But like just reading things that help me dream, literally, like things that help me dream. But I guess these are also things that that have such a distance from the everyday life, because I'm reading about the everyday life in philosophy. So like things I can detach from and engage, like play with, right? And so like I would just read, like, and I'm not trying to read, like finish the story. Like I'll literally read like 3 pages in 3 hours, and I'm happy to do that because again, during the week, I'm reading to finish, and now I'm just reading, and I'm like, oh, this makes me think of so and so. Like, pick up the phone and call them, and then I'll come back and read half a paragraph, and so that has been one way of relaxing, moving my body. I think this became, I think, especially during COVID, like going on walks was a lifeline for me. I used to run, I still run. So on days when I don't run, I try and go on walks, just like keep my body moving. Like that's very helpful for me. Wow, what else do I do for fun? And then again, hang out with people, trying not to do philosophy, though with philosophers, all like 5 minutes and then we're back into it, which is fun when, it's fun sometimes, most times, but also hanging out, just like trying to be social, like intentionally, and do that even when I feel like I'm too busy, like force myself to take the break. Yeah.
Yeah, that all sounds great, and is probably advice that I should take too. Yeah, I especially like your point about reading. So first of all, I will say those books do sound like they relate to myth. So in a way, it's a break, but it's also engaging with your recent philosophical interest. But I think also, yeah, it's really wise of you to point out that it helps you to take a kind of different attitude towards reading, because I've noticed for myself since I've been in grad school that I don't read for fun in the same way that I used to. Reading feels so much like work. So so it sounds like that's a good way to kind of recapture your passion and interest around reading. So
absolutely.
Really cool.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm wondering, so you said that you're sitting in on a class. Is that the Black Hegel class or the Plato one?
No, I'm sitting in on a Lyotard class. We started with his politics. I don't want to call it his politics. This is probably wrong, but on the different but it's going in the direction of psychoanalysis, which like the rest of the readings this semester, which this professor, I have heard great things about them. So I'm like, let's see if I'll see this magic that everyone talks about. But also, again, because I am learning psychoanalysis, I didn't do, I never read any psychoanalysis in undergrad. And my department, like there are not just the philosophy department, but like the humanities, there's like professors who work with that or find it as a resource for thinking about what they're thinking about. So in that sense, like I'm interested. And yeah, I think I haven't also taken like a lot of political philosophy, but it's he helps me think about conflict in a way that the few political philosophers I've read about don't write about. But yeah, that's why I'm sitting in.
Yeah. Sounds really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me think of what we were just talking about with reading for fun. I imagine that sitting in on a class also helps to, and correct me if I'm wrong, also helps to engage with philosophy in this kind of way that keeps your passion going. Because at least for me, I feel like sometimes, even if I'm taking a class I enjoy, the pressure to do well in it can kind of get in the way with engaging in the philosophy in a creative way. So but at the same time, it's an extra time commitment. So it's pretty impressive that on top of all your grad school work, you're also sitting in on something.
Yeah, I have to say, because I don't let myself, because if I want to engage, I really want to do the reading. And so if I'm doing the reading, I'm taking the class, technically. And I don't know if I'll maybe go to like 2 other classes, but when I start writing my papers, I can't keep doing it. So in that sense, it's an extra time commitment, and it's just I think I just had FOMO this semester, but I should be more strict about taking 3 classes so that I can spend more time with the actual material in those classes. And use the time to rest or do other things. But sometimes it's just like, this is the one time I get to learn this. So what am I going to do? And that was me this semester. But again, like you said, it's nice to have that flexibility. So if I can't make it, it's no big deal. If I can't do the reading, it's no big deal just because I feel bad, like I should know what they're talking about. But it's like, if you have just a bit extra time, like that's a good thing to do. And also it brings to bear on what else you're working on, which is always a positive thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to the struggle of trying to be disciplined and have boundaries. But at the same time, yeah, that FOMO, because you're only in grad school once and you want to like take in as much as you can, learn as much as you can, because as we were talking about earlier, the more you learn, the more it seems like you have to learn. But I think that's really smart advice to think about how it relates to your work in particular, because I know I've had the problem of taking, joining reading groups or sitting in on classes that I thought would be really interesting. But yeah, it's really important to make sure that it can also relate to what you're going to specialize in.
Yeah. Or it's a commitment you can keep up with, because sometimes it's not worth it to like start and not finish. There's a lot of like calculation around taking those extra commitments, because they're so appealing. But yeah, I hear you.
And I guess on that topic, how do you, this is mostly for my own benefit, but it sounds like you've done a good job of continuing to expand on your papers for professionalization stuff, right, for presentations. So I'm wondering, do you have any tricks or tips for other graduate student listeners, but also undergraduate student listeners, for how you keep disciplined about working on your writing, even on top of all of these other commitments that you have?
Wow, you had to go there, because I know what I should do. But doing it is so difficult. Especially because it's always at the end of the day and it's like, I'm too exhausted for this. But our DGS, DLEC, like the one time we met, she was like, yeah, you should write for 30 minutes a day. Like, this is what you should be doing during coursework, like to get your writing, like to learn your writing skills, so that by the time you get to write your dissertation, you're not struggling. And I have been trying to do that. The most I have done is like 3 times maybe 4 times per week. But what I've started to do now, like, so, which has made me more consistent, is not wait until the end of the day as like a reflection on everything I learned, but actually as part of doing the reading. So like forcing myself to do like mini reflections, which again is hard to do when you haven't even finished the reading. And it's like, am I going to spend this 30 minutes writing when I could finish these other 2 pages? But I think the more I do it, like actually the easier it is, because I think I write better than I talk. But the more I write like that as like a reflection on a reading, or as a daily practice, the easier it is to like bring the two together. But it's like, again, because I write better than I talk, I think better when I write than I do by just reading, or by not, or taking notes here and there, but actually actively engaging. And so in that sense, I know it's the best thing anyone can do for themselves, especially in coursework. I am trying to like be more consistent. Yeah, that's the advice that I got, which I think really works. Yeah.
Yeah, that is helpful. Thank you. And yeah, you're right. Keeping in mind that writing about what you're reading helps you engage with it more deeply can hopefully help mitigate these concerns of, why am I writing when I should be reading? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
we only have a few minutes left, so I have two things that I'm gonna throw at you. First of all,
Okay.
of course, you're an LUC MAP alum, so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your experience with the program. Yeah, your experience with the program. Hopefully good things, but also if not, that's fine too. And I also want to give you a chance to just give a shout out or kind of self-promotion if there's anything that you want us to take away from today's talk or know about you as a philosopher.
Okay, I'll start with MAP. I think even to think about doing grad school in philosophy, like community, the sense of community that I found in MAP was really helpful or fundamental to thinking about philosophy as a long-term commitment or a thing I actually do, as opposed to just take classes, right? And so in that sense, just like finding other people who are passionate about it, who are talking about it, minorities in philosophy, which is like really important to see and live and be affirmed in as like a minority in philosophy. This sentence doesn't make sense. Anyway, so that was like key to like deciding to do grad school. Even though, and I think also like the hope that wherever I end up for grad school, maybe there'll be something of this shape or form, like a community of this shape or form in philosophy, right? So it wasn't as intimidating, and it just gave me a sense that I'll always find community one way or another. I don't know why. And so in that sense, like I'm really grateful for MAP, for my time in MAP, but I also think the programming that I attended exposed me to topics and ways to think about philosophy and to engage in philosophy in ways that were not so obvious in class, but were also personal in ways that didn't come out in like classes usually, and also give me the opportunity to engage in philosophy on a personal level. So like the museum visits, the movie nights, movie days, the movie, and also like talking about what I found interesting in these events with, again, other like passionate minorities in philosophy was really affirming for me. So yeah, I think it's a positive experience. It was a positive experience. I think it's worth trying out. And especially for like students who are thinking about like philosophy a little bit seriously, like that's a good place to start. And also like mentorship with the grad students whom I don't say I could trust easier than the professors in terms of like what grad school is like, but sort of, right? It's more easier, like it's easier to relate to a grad students, to their experiences and to hear the experience of grad school than professors who did this like 5 decades ago, 3 decades ago, maybe a few years ago. So yeah, that's MAP for me. And then I don't know if I have any shout outs, but except like I'm really excited to be back at Loyola, whatever this is. I am, excited to see what MAP is doing and what else you end up doing. And yeah.
Yeah, and I'm so grateful to you for agreeing to do this interview now that you're on the other side, a grad student. And so, yeah, I totally agree. When I was in undergrad, and I'm sure many of our listeners agree too, it's really helpful to have graduate students speak frankly about their experience, about the classes you like, your strategies, your community, what the application process was, and it helps demystify it. So again, Schola, I'm really, really grateful to you for joining us for this interview today. We are just past 5:30, so I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. But thanks again for joining us for this interview. Go ahead.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks to our listeners. And again, this is sponsored by LUC MAP, and we hope to see you next month at our next public philosophy talk. All right. Bye, everyone. Thanks.